the next speaker we have coming to speak to you. I'll start with the story. In the times of Margaret Thatcher, Friedrich who helped start the Institute of Economic Affairs, and one very critical component of that institute was this man named Anthony Fisher, who was using a mix of charm, communication skills, and fundraising to develop institutions that eventually fueled the intellectual economic policy direction that both in the United States and the US. Now, Rizwan Rawji is the Anthony Fisher of Pakistan. He runs around the entire world raising support for economic reform in Pakistan. He will, he's been a supporter of crime, a big foundation stone in many ways, especially since the last 7 or 8 years, helping crime open doors, get people connected. In fact, last year, if I'm not wrong, he was instrumental in bringing Dr. Arthur Laffer to Pakistan, and that was a significant moment in at least the lives of researchers in Islamabad, because for the first time they got to speak to somebody who was really involved in policy making at the time of Reagan. He was an advisor to Reagan and also known as the father of flat taxes. Dr. Kramal Haq, of course, is very well versed with Dr. Arthur Laffer's work and also his personality. So, without further ado, Rizwan Rawji on the supply side tax reforms for Pakistan.
Hey. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. Can you guys all hear me okay? All right? All right. I want to say one thing. I was not born in Pakistan. I was born in the middle of nowhere, in the jungles of the Congo. I lived very few of my life in Pakistan in my early days. So most of my life I've lived abroad in 4 different continents. And a lot of people in and out of Pakistan, they ask me this question: what the heck? Why do you care about Pakistan? Why do you care about this country? Well, the answer is very simply 3 things. First, we have not fulfilled Qaid-e-Azam's vision. It has to be fulfilled. Period. Second, our graveyard, the family graveyard, is in Pakistan. And the third reason, the Pakistan cricket team. All right, my title of my speech today is Supply Side Tax Reforms for Sustained Economic Growth. There are 6 pillars of supply-side economic policies. As my mentor and good friend, Dr. Arthur Laffer, pointed out in his keynote speech 1 year ago at the first Prime Prosperity Forum. They are, now please listen, the 6 pillars, that's for me, these are the primordial part of supply-side economics. Number 1. A low rate, broad-based tax system. A low rate, broad-based tax system. Number 2, free trade. Number 3, sound money. Number 4, spending restraint. Number 5, deregulation. Number 6, privatization. All 6 are essential to achieve prosperity. However, due to time restraints, I will only focus on 2 of the 6 pillars. The first being low rate, broad-based tax system, and the second, free trade. A low rate, broad-based tax system needs A to Z rationalization. And that is basically on the direct and indirect taxation. And the subcomponents of these are the income taxes and the corporate tax. The second part is the indirect taxes. Now that is subdivision into the sales tax on goods and services, custom duty, and excise duty. It is evident that direct and indirect taxes both have the narrowest tax base and the highest tax rate. Now, please, ladies and gentlemen, when I talk about taxes, there's a very particular difference between taxes and tax rates. That is the key component of supply side economics. When you talk about taxes, that's one side of the equation, the other is the tax rate. For me, it's the tax rate that is the most important, essential part of the equation. Included in these high tax rates, we have withholding provisions, multiple tax brackets, subsidies, exemptions, amnesties, perks, etc., etc. Furthermore, tax codes are complex and confusing. It's no wonder why tax revenues to GDP remains constant at around 9.5%, 10% over the last so many years. If Pakistan wants to get out of this dilemma, it must embrace supply side economics and economic policies. In short, Pakistan needs to embrace the Laffer curve. Yeah.
So you asked me, what is the Laffer curve? Now, in all honesty, the Laffer curve, as you may see, is my profile, but no, it's not. The Laffer curve is the relationship between tax rates and total tax revenues. And by the way, I did not name it the Laffer curve, and it's been around for centuries and centuries. In fact, the first reference to it I really know is in Medina in 1381. Ibn Khaldun described it this way. At the beginning of dynasties, tax rates are low and revenues are high. At the end of dynasties, tax rates are high and revenues are low. That's the sort of logic behind it. But let me, if I can say, how much would you work if you were taxed at 100%? So that every time you go to the office, instead of getting a check, you get a bill. Obviously, you wouldn't work at all, and there'd be no work, but also the tax revenues would be zero. Now, that's this point right here on the Laffer curve. At 100% tax rates, no one will find there's any incentive whatsoever to work. They won't work, and tax revenues will be zero as well. Now, as you start lowering tax rates to 99, to 98, to 97, somewhere along the line, all of a sudden, you're going to find it worthwhile to start working, and you're going to see revenues starting to rise. The other point of the Laffer curve that's fixed is at zero tax rates. At zero tax rates, if there are no taxes, of course, the government's not going to collect any revenues. We're going to have a lot of output, employment, production, but there'll be no revenues. And that's this point down here. And again, at this point, if they start raising tax rates, as they start raising tax rates, what you're going to find is the revenues are going to increase, but they're going to increase at slower and slower rates. And these two curves will come at a point, a maximum point out here. Now, the key thing about the Laffer curve that makes it fairly interesting for politicians is to remember it's a pedagogic device, not an explicit measure of any one country. But what it does show you is that there are two tax rates that give the same amount of revenue. There's a high tax rate and a low tax rate. No country should ever want to be in that high tax rate range. I mean, why would you ever want a tax at this point where if you lower tax rates, you collected more money, and you have more output, employment, and production. So this is the Laffer curve, which really brings together the debate about taxes. There are two effects taxes have on revenues. Number one, which we call the arithmetic effect. If you raise tax rates, you do collect more revenue per dollar of tax base. That's the arithmetic effect. But there's also the economic effect, which if you increase tax rates, you reduce the attractiveness of doing the activity, and you will shrink the tax base. These two effects, the arithmetic effect and the economic effect, always work in the opposite direction. In this range, the arithmetic effect wins, and you get more revenues by raising tax rates. In this range, the economic effect wins, which by raising tax rates, you actually get less revenues because you do more and more damage to the tax base. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Laffer curve. Thank you.
So economics, as Dr. Laffer mentioned, is all about incentives. Incentives on work and investment for enhanced productivity and capital investment. There is no doubt in my mind that given the current tax rates and its narrow tax base, Pakistan is on the prohibitive range of the Laffer curve. A low rate on a broad-based tax is the solution. Tax incentives also have a tremendous positive effect on economic growth. Pakistan's GDP growth has consistently underperformed, and real GDP per capita has trended downwards compared to its most significant neighbors. Pakistan's high population growth rate with a low GDP growth rate further exacerbates the situation. Tax incentives also have a positive effect on government tax revenues. By far, the biggest challenge for Pakistan is how to increase its tax to GDP ratio. The World Bank, in its 2019 report, the $400 million report called Pakistan Raises Revenue, clearly states, and I quote, Pakistan has substantial potential to increase tax receipts without imposing new taxes or raising tax rates, which recommends a broad-based low tax rate approach, targeting a tax to GDP ratio of 9.5% to 17% over the next 5 years. Now, this is not me talking. I'm talking about the World Bank report, which is available on the website, and you can all read it. Okay. To broaden the tax base on individuals, the prime focus should be on the high income earners, which I call the 1%. High income earners are the most sensitive to incentives. They have the means to shelter their income in many ways, such as avoidance, evasion, or simply by not working. The tax base of the high income earners is extremely low, and there's a huge potential for increasing the revenues. If taxation is about fairness, then all attempts should be made to generate as much of tax revenues from the high income earners. Lowering the highest marginal tax rate, which today I believe it's 35%, for income greater than 12 million Pakistani rupees. Is that correct, Dr. Ikram? There's to reduce the rate of 35 to near the level of the median tax rate, there's a high probability that we will see the Laffer curve effect, as Dr. Laffer said, When you come down the Laffer curve, you get more incentivized, and therefore your tax earnings are also on the increase. Whenever the top income tax rates are high, the high earners pay a lesser share of their true income. When top income tax rates are low, the high earners pay a greater share of their true income. According to Pakistan's tax experts, and one of them is sitting right here in this room, Dr. Ikram, can you please stand up? And I'm talking about tax experts. In their study, now I don't know if any of you have ever read this thing that was published by Prime. I think we did it in 2019. Okay. I highly suggest that if you're not a reader of economics, at least try to read the first chapter. And this was done by Dr. Ikram and his lovely wife, Huzaima Bukhari. It's a comprehensive tax study on supply side for Pakistan. And it's right there, available, free of cost. According to Huzaima Bukhari and Dr. Ikram Mulhaq in their study, which I just mentioned to you right now, a flat rate tax at 10% with no deductions on all individual taxpayers will increase the tax base from the current around 3 million to up to 8 million individuals. In return, tax revenues from the current 4 trillion, I believe, rupees can go as high as up to 8 trillion. And actually, I was discussing with Dr. Ikram this morning over breakfast. He says, no, Rizwan, it's going to be 12 trillion rupees. So I said, hey, Dr. Ikram, let's be on the conservative side and keep it to that 8 trillion figure. And this is over a period of 5 years because it takes time for the economy to get incentivized and therefore increase in the tax revenues. So in all, it's a win-win situation. To broaden the tax base on corporations, the prime focus should be on the large corporations. Large corporations have the means to minimize the tax. They can hire the best tax advisors, tax lawyers, and many other ways to avoid their tax obligations. The current tax rate on corporations, which is 29%, and I believe recently we added a 10% super tax, which I think we call it the MIFTA tax. Is that the MIFTA tax? Is not only higher compared to Pakistan's immediate neighbors, but is also within the rest of Asia. Corporations make decisions on capital investments based on their after-tax income. Maximizing after-tax income allows them to grow and create millions of jobs. And again, thanks to our 2 tax experts, they suggest that a flat rate of tax at 20% on all corporates is the solution. This will incentivize domestic and foreign entities to invest in Pakistan. As companies grow, and honestly speaking, there are virtually no national champions in Pakistan. Okay, even if they are, they're actually right now receding. It's a win-win situation. Pakistan has very few national champions, like I said. It is also evident that indirect tax rates on sales on goods and services, which is at 17%, is also much higher compared to not only our immediate neighbors, but according to the rest of Asia. Besides the high tax rate, there once again is an additional tax burden due to high inflation on the general public, especially towards the low income class. Sales tax also has a very narrow base. In total, more than 89% is paid by less than 400 entities. In reality, the effective sales tax rate for domestic sales on goods and services is 4.5%. The main reasons behind this is due to high cost of compliance, multiplicity of sales tax rates, and being confusing and complex. This increases the opportunities for avoidance, evasion, and corruption. It also increases the cost to government of administrating the system. Again, according to our tax expert, they advise a single-digit sales tax rate of 5% on all goods and services. This case for simplicity will have enormous benefits for the taxpayers and the tax collectors. Again, a win-win situation. Custom duty also has a very narrow tax base. There are only 10 top commodities that contribute to the bulk of the custom duty. Duty slabs from 3% to 20% with a large number of tariff lines, full of SRO-ridden system, under-invoicing, and the culture of corruption. Tariff policy is not employed as a revenue instrument, rather than a trade policy instrument. Furthermore, the vast amount of revenue collection by the government is at the import stage, around 55%, I believe, in the form of withholding provisions. No wonder this starves the businesses in their working capital. Policymakers fail to understand that you need to import in order to export, and that the trade deficit is also a capital surplus. Free trade for Pakistan, like the rest of Asia, would by itself add enormously to the country's prosperity. Government revenues from custom duty at 13% in the overall share of the revenues is very pale compared to the rest of the tax revenues. Again, Bukhari and Dr. Haq suggest a single rate of custom duty at 5%, and this being revenue neutral for the exchequer. Again, a win-win situation. In summary, a low rate flat tax on the broadest base, 10% on individuals, 20% on corporations, 5% on sales and goods and services, and 5% on custom duty. The supply side tax policies with a low rate broad-based tax rate will shift the tax structure. Can you show that?
Sir, आपके पास वो है उसे.
The transformation. No, not that one. Yeah, that. Will shift the tax structure transformation vision from indirect taxes to direct taxes. Currently, indirect tax represents more than 60% of government tax revenues and direct tax about 40%. The policy recommended will target the distribution so that direct tax will represent more than 70% of government revenues and indirect tax at 30% of government revenues. A broad tax base removes as many ways as possible for people to hide their income and avoid paying taxes. With enough love for one's country and an abundance of political will, such a tax reform is relatively easy to achieve. But the relatively effortless implementation should not fool you. It will have massive beneficial consequences and would start yielding results almost immediately. Budget deficit, which I call the big elephant in the room. Ever increasing budget deficits due to insufficient tax collection and excessive government spending has consistently led to massive government borrowing in order to fill the fiscal gap. Debt addiction is like heroin addiction. Easy to start, but hard to quit. Debt obligations now at almost 40% of government budget is killing Pakistan. It must stop, and it must stop now. We do not realize that the role of government is not to distribute its annual revenues towards its creditors, but rather towards development in infrastructure, health, and education. With global interest rates rising and rupee devaluations, it is making it harder and harder, if not impossible, for Pakistan to service its external and internal debts and liabilities. Debt servicing by further borrowing is like borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. It has a domino effect on all aspects of macroeconomics and is the root cause of the general malaise. Year-on-year budget deficits have direct impact on the current account deficits as well, and the balance of payments. Government spending, which I call taxation, and borrowing starves the private sector of shared valuable resources. Unless and until we put in place a set of supply-side economic policies, the crisis of balance of payments will remain. Free markets activate a country's economic immune system, which is so desperately needed to get out of this crisis. The government of Pakistan should be in the business of undoing things and not doing things. Government has become the problem, not the solution. We need to get out of this quagmire. And last but not the least element of my speech is called the trust deficit. Trust is essential in conducting good business, and government should do the same in the political economy. Lack of trust between all stakeholders leads to political and economic paralysis. Politics and economics are two sides of the same coin. Good politics equals good economics and vice versa. Lack of political will is a constant frustration for economists and economic policy advocates. We may give policy advice, but it is up to the political class to implement these policies. As the saying goes, we can take the horse to the water, but cannot force it to drink. Even worse is the outright dismissal by the naysayers. And to them I say, how can you reflect on the quality of a cricket team if you don't let them on the playing field? So let's put a stop to government's whack-a-mole, ill-advised solutions. Let's not be myopic and let common sense prevail over dumb ideas. We constantly talk about stabilizing the economy. I don't know if you guys keep hearing, I keep hearing it all the time. Stabilizing, stabilizing. After every crisis, stabilizing for me is getting the patient out of ICU and into the recovery room. Not good enough. What we need is for the patient to get out of the hospital and getting back to work. Economic prosperity can only be achieved through sustained economic growth. So let's embrace supply-side economics. Let's embrace the Laffer curve. There is too much negativity around. And for me, the glass is always half full and never half empty. The future of our young generation is at stake. And therefore, it is our duty to do what is right, and time is short. Pakistan could be where it should be, if only. The best is yet to come. Pakistan, Zindabad, Pakistan, Pahindabad.